it's actually a jovial episode. We're going to have a lot of fun this week of the HIAC Wrestling Podcast, This Week in Wrestling History. And of course, we just watched Dark Side of the Ring and the Herb Abrams story of the UWF. So we're going to talk about that. Money in Banks this weekend, too. I guess we'll touch upon that at one point. I don't know, maybe. I'm not sure. Dan Law 83, you can follow me on Twitter. Follow Craig. Over there. Over there. Oh, over there. At Craig Lagans. It's real hard. You see it on the bottom of your screen. If you're not listening, just spell his name. So yeah, Dark Side of the Ring delivered another great documentary. And I came to the conclusion, and I don't, this is not a negative critique. This is not a critique. The Herb Abrams, happy Wednesday, Danielle. Danielle's watching.
Hey, Danielle.
On Facebook. This is a subject you and I, just like last week. My God, I just drew a blank. Oh, the Dino Bravo.
You're saying, yeah.
The same thing this week. You and I know a lot of people did know about it, but still, the documentary, this show is fantastic. There's a lot of fans that watch wrestling that did not know about Herb Abrams in the UWF, so I saw a lot of tweets about that, so it was cool to see that, but holy moly, there is a lot of footage I've never seen before. And really, it just, I'll touch upon this first. At the end, Brian Blair said, if he had a little, no, it wasn't Brian Blair. I forgot who said it was standing over his grave that said, if he just had a little more money, I think he would have given Vince a run for his money. No.
No. Either Sonny Beach or Stevie Ray said that. The original Stevie Ray, not the Harlem Heat Stevie Ray. But
the bad Stevie Ray.
that worked for Herb Abrams or worked with Herb Abrams. Can't really say they worked for Herb Abrams because I'm sure a lot of people still haven't been paid by Herb Abrams, so that's where the work for thing has a little loose connotation to it. Yeah, like the Dino Bravo episode from last week, there wasn't anything I didn't already know. What I love about the Dark Side of the Ring, the documentaries, is the never before seen photos, the backstage stuff I never saw before. And the pictures, the candid shots I'd never seen before. I always found that fascinating. But the Herb Abrams story is it's more of a cautionary tale. We were talking before we went on the air. This guy was such a bombastic personality and got so many people. He got so many people to smell what he was cooking, to join up. And he went after the right people. This is 1990, so this is right. He's catching guys that have been to both the big two, the NWA and the WWF, and were kind of, not really desired by either company, like your Dan Spivey's and your Sid Vicious and your Cactus Jacks at the time. And this is right after the beginning of the fall of WCW and before the rise of the indies, so there really wasn't anywhere else to go. This is 2 years before ECW. This is 4 years before Smoky Mountain.
Yeah.
So guys like Mick Foley and Sid Vicious, Dan Spivey, Dr. Death, even Jimmy Snuka hey, another federation? Yeah, I'll be there. Yeah, Brian Blair, Paul Orndorff, who still had something left. They still had a couple years left, in their opinion. So why wouldn't you take a payday and wrestle in front of folks? And this guy says he can do it, and he's got all this money, which, one of the things that bugged me about the documentary, and they are magnificent, it never explained how or where the money came from. I know he said he was in a lot of different businesses, but I never still explained how he can keep renting these huge arenas and paying these guys that, even by indie standards, demand a lot of money for their appearances.
Yeah, that kind of bummed me out. I was kind of hoping that a little bit of light on his life would have been shed, but we didn't get any of that, and that's okay. It's still a great documentary. Yeah. Again, a lot of times you get footage that you've never seen before, and there's a bunch. Yeah. The only other time I've seen footage of this really is Brian Zane, Wrestling with Regret, Regret with a W. If you're not subscribed to that YouTube channel, Please do. His arguments with Jim Cornette, which were kind of stupid on Jim Cornette's part, in my opinion,
Hmm.
in my opinion, aside, he's got a great channel. He reviews. He's been doing it more often, obviously, since wrestling's kind of not happening right now, other than the big two. Um, Old shows, and one time he did the Universal Wrestling Federation.
Hmm.
I will say this: it's a good companion piece to the Dark Side, because the Dark Side of the Ring was more of a documentary of Herb Abrams and his involvement with the UWF. Brian Zane's video kind of showcases the work within the ring
Yeah,
or lack thereof. It
or lack
depends.
thereof. Yeah,
Man, I
you could
forgot,
call it
Mick.
work.
Go ahead.
Herb Abrams matches or Herb Abrams produced matches aren't really matches so much as guys kind of thrown together and hey, let's do that thing that we did and acted like an indie show. And Mick Foley said it best: it's a Herb show. He doesn't care what we do. So let's walk up into an empty arena and just start suplexing each other.
Yeah. It's the MGM Grand is what made me laugh, because I that's the one thing I either forgotten about or didn't know was the MGM Grand show. And booking MGM Grand. Where is everybody? Oh, somebody screwed up. Yeah, you
Yeah,
you did.
yeah, like how you're the boss, you're at the top, and it's someone else's fault. Like it's no, it's you. You booked the venue, and way too big for what you could cover, and expecting everyone to show up or just to see your yellow boots. Not a sound investment.
The yellow boots.
But
I mean,
even when he got his underneath talent, you could see the footage. Even Mick Foley trying to wrestle with a guy who's probably never wrestled before, and how he doesn't sell for him. That's painful to watch in and of itself.
let me tell you, I don't proclaim to be tough or like a badass. I can hold my own. I have before. But if I was in that guy's position, friend or not, and Herb walked up to me before the show and was like, "Hey, people are gonna love this," and you know that you haven't sold 300, 400 tickets, and he whips out a pair of cowboy boots, I'm gonna beat his ass with the goddamn boots. I swear to God. Come here, you little.
I would have just taken the boost and thrown him out the window.
Oh
It's
my
like,
God.
I, yeah, but I feel your frustration
Oh my God.
when Mick Foley told the story because this is gonna blow their minds. Wait do you see this? Wait do you
This
see
is
this?
gonna
And
blow
I know
their
Mick, just like
mind.
the viewer, is thinking this will be something that'll grab the fans, that'll get people through the door. And he whips out a pair of yellow boots that were on camera once and hidden behind under his dress pants. I don't get it. I didn't get Herb Abrams, even when
No.
I watched the UWF Power Hour. This is 1990, where I was still a huge wrestling fan, where I watched wherever I could. Uh, of course, back then it was NWA and WWF and AWA had long since gone out of business. So seeing guys I already knew and trying to keep track of them, and it was on Sports Channel back then, pre ESPN. Well, still in the ESPN era, but Sports Channel was where you can catch a
Sports
lot of indie wrestling from other promotions. But again, this is before the indie scene took off, so watching these guys on Sports Channel was a big deal, and I was pulling for him. Not that I ever thought he would be in competition with Vince, but an alternative. That's how I became an NWA fan in the first place
Yeah.
because it's an alternative. It's like I don't just like, vanilla ice cream and it's like there's 32 flavors out there. Okay, well, let me see what else is out there. I'm not going to think, well, just because I've had vanilla my whole life, this has got to be it. No, look around. And I just watched it on mute. The Herb when I watched the UWF shows just because of Herb Abrams' commentary. Even though as much as my love for Bruno knows no bounds, my love for Bruno as a commentator has severe limits.
How did
So,
Bruno sit there and tolerate that?
uh, Bruno still loves wrestling, and it wasn't Vince. And back then, they had a common enemy. They both hated Vince
That's
and both
true.
wanted to take him down. And what better way to get back at Vince and get the guy that built the company from the ground up in the first place? And I didn't know the Andre the Giant story either. That was new. That was new to me.
I did like the next day. Vince was like, "Hey Andre, you want to come work for me? I got yep.
Oh,
I ain't working for this guy. He was out.
oh. Well, you'll
I'm
pay
out.
me to fly where? Okay, here I come.
Bye." Oh, yeah. Hell, and if
But
anybody hasn't watched that episode, please do. It's. I did love
yeah,
Brian Blair to say, "Well, you know what? I won't give the last line away, but that sums up Herb Abrams to a T."
that made me crack up. That Herb Abrams died doing what he loved. And Brian Blair looks great
Yeah,
still.
he does.
I don't think that guy ever aged.
I don't think he's retired either, technically.
I wouldn't pro it wouldn't I wouldn't be surprised if he was on an indie show somewhere because he's always kept himself in great shape. He's one of the few wrestlers that I know of that uh if he was on the juice, he didn't take it long or didn't need it
Oh,
because like I said, he's always kept himself in great shape. He's always looked good.
he
Um
literally retired last year. Literally, just last year.
Literally, okay, wow, okay, but
He
yeah,
looked good, man.
he looked amazing, and I think the only thing that got me about this was we still don't know how Herb Abrams died. Just like his life was such a mystery, like how he got all this money, what actually he did, how he died was just a mystery because during the documentary, if you haven't seen it, there's four different accounts of how he died, and I still don't know which one is which. One said that the cops found him dead, covered in Vaseline or baby oil and cocaine. Another one was he was chasing hookers with a baseball bat and ran into the door and knocked himself out and died. The other version was the cops found him. They were going to arrest him. He had a coronary and died. The other one, he died in
It's
the back of a
probably
police
that
car.
one. I think
Yeah.
it's that one. It's that or the
Okay.
police car one. I think.
Yeah. Or he died in jail. But all these versions were told during the documentary, so I still have no idea how Herb Abrams died, although we do know that he is dead, even though
Okay.
some speculated that he faked his death.
He's not that smart.
And no, and Mick Foley said it best. He's such an attention whore. If he faked his death, he'd have to come back at some point the last 30 years, just because the spotlight he would need the spotlight
He would.
very badly.
I would absolutely. He would not be able to keep quiet. Yeah.
No, no, but yeah, Herb Abrams on the Dark Side of the Ring. Please, please, please check it out. Well, Dan, as we talk about the recent passing of the recent history involving the great Herb Abrams, it's time to take the rest of you on a journey back into the very past of professional wrestling. I'm going to put on my all-seeing goggles so I can look well into the past because we're going to go back to a time where territories ruled the world of professional wrestling, where travel was key, where belts were called belts and not titles, and where fans were called fans, not the universe, and when sports entertainment was indeed professional wrestling. In fact, I'm going to start at April 30th, one of the most significant days in professional wrestling history, a date that changed my life. One of the most important dates in the history of the WWF, and to me, one of the most important dates in professional wrestling. April 30th, 1977. Superstar Billy Graham defeats my childhood idol Bruno Sammartino for the WWF Heavyweight Championship in Baltimore, Maryland.
Holy moly!
Does so with his feet on the ropes. First wrestler to ever do that. PNA World Champion with both feet on the ropes is commonplace now, but the fact that it happened in Baltimore, Maryland, to Bruno Sammartino, the referee counted his shoulders down, 1, 2, 3, and superstar Billy Graham, of all people, was handed the WWF Heavyweight Championship. Bruno Sammartino, the living legend, had been defeated, and superstar Billy Graham, a true heel, who out of his own mouth doesn't have a lick of wrestling ability, but is the most charismatic and most influential wrestler of my generation. The first guy to tear off his shirt when he got into the ring, superstar. First guy to wear feather boas, not Jesse Ventura, Superstar. First
Superstar.
guy to refer to his arms as pythons, Superstar. First heel to be world champion in the WWF, where it's commonplace now. Orton, Bray Wyatt, Brock Lesnar, even Chris Jericho. But the first charismatic heel to be world champion, Superstar. Superstar has influenced more wrestlers than any wrestler, and I would even include Ric Flair in that because you don't have a heel world champion. You don't have a flamboyant, blonde-haired muscle superstar. No pun intended. Without Billy, without Billy Graham, and it all started April 30th, 1977. And for the 10 months that Billy Graham was champion, he sold out every single arena he wrestled in.
I did want to break in. This is just about the segment itself.
Hmm.
I don't. Our user, is it Gratchinson on Twitch just asked, "Where's the screen effect?" And I have to let everybody know about a little bit of magic. I haven't figured out how to make the screen black and white in OBS, so I do that in post editing after we've recorded the show and I upload it back to YouTube. I added in the black and white so we can take a trip back in black and white for the YouTube version. If
Yeah,
somebody could give me a step by step of how to do that within 1 second in OBS, I'd love to do it live because that means I'd have to edit it less after the fact anyway. I didn't want. I just popped the bubble. I just popped the magic, and I feel bad. But I wanted to explain that. I'm sorry. I
that's
feel
okay.
bad. Thank you for listening, Gratchinson. Though I really appreciate it. Rev's here,
Thank
Danielle's
you.
here, everybody's here.
Yes, thank you for your attention to detail, Gratchinson.
I feel
Yeah, I
bad.
do
I let him
appreciate it.
down, man.
Yeah, because I didn't feel black and white. It's like, wait a minute, there's
Well,
something off here. I
you're
don't.
halfway there.
I'm still in color. Anyway, but April 30th, 1977, the superstar Billy Graham himself still remembers that date. When I pay homage to it every year on Facebook or on social media, he has uh, shared my article about him, and he's told other people that April 30th, 1977 is a big day in professional wrestling history. It altered where the WWF went. Uh, Superstar was 40 years ahead of his time. Um, had Vince McMahon not had the deal in place to have Superstar be a transitional champion between him and Bob Backlund, because back wrestling back in the day, kids, you were given for some world champions, and this is when the WWF was a member of the NWA. For title changes, they would give you a start date and an end date. Um, in the early days, Jack Briscoe and Dory Funk Jr. had a huge feud for the NWA title. Neither one wanted to do the job for the other, so Harley Race was brought in to beat Dory Funk Jr., and Jack Briscoe was to beat Harley Race. And Harley was given a start date and an end date, which would be 67 days apart. Superstar Billy Graham, when he defeated Bruno, he was given an end date, which was February of 1978 at Madison Square Garden.
Wow.
Had Vince Sr. been more like Vince Jr. and saw the amount of houses and sellouts that Superstar Billy Graham was having, not just up and down the East Coast, but in the NWA stronghold of St. Louis, in Texas, and in Toronto as WWF champion, 10 months could have gone to 2 years.
Yeah.
You could have switched him face easily uh, against guys like the perennial big three that would challenge Bruno, Ivan Koloff, Ernie Ladd, even the Stan Hansen. Had him switch face, bring Dusty back to team with him against an Ivan Koloff and Stan Hansen, and Ivan Koloff and Nikolai Volkov, and you got another year of sellouts. But wrestling the way it was back then, Superstar Billy Graham had a begin date and an end date, 10 months. But it started April 30th, 1977, the most significant date to me, next to Bruno winning the title in WWF history, because it started the most influential wrestler of my generation, Superstar Billy Graham's title reign. That same date, April 30th, 1983, Greg Valentine would defeat Roddy Piper for the United States heavyweight title. This was the bout that Piper's eardrum was lacerated. This was the bout where Valentine repeatedly slammed the United States belt against the head of Roddy Piper, and Piper was bleeding a gusher, and he was not to continue, and he was ruled unable to continue, and that would start and Piper would sit out for a couple of months, and had a ringing in his ear, had only 10% hearing in that ear for the rest of his career, and that would start the Greg Valentine Roddy Piper feud that would culminate in the dog collar match in Starrcade of that year, 1983. But that April 30th, 1983, was when Greg Valentine won the United States title from Roddy Piper and damaging his ear. May 1st, 1981, I said in last week's Wrestling Historian that Tommy Rich had defeated the NWA champion Harley Race to win the NWA heavyweight title in Augusta, Georgia. Well, 5 days later, when you know it, May 1st, 1981, Harley Race regained the NWA title from Tommy Rich in Gainesville, Georgia. This was, of course, a favor to Jim Barnett, the promoter of Georgia Championship Wrestling. Tommy Rich had been their #1 babyface, and it was agreed that Harley would drop the title to Tommy Rich, but it wouldn't do it in the Omni. Would not do it in Atlanta. They agreed on Augusta for the title change and Gainesville for the regaining. In between that, Tommy had defeated Harley Race in his one and only title defense, and I believe in Smyrna, Georgia. But 5 days, Tommy Rich was NWA champion, and it ended May 1st, 1981, making Harley Race a 4-time NWA champion at this point. And it would cement Tommy Rich's career for the rest of his wrestling career. He will always be billed as a former world champion. And wherever he went, that kept Tommy Rich a main event face for the time being, at least for the next 2 years in Georgia. But he will always be a former NWA champion, and no one can ever take that away from Wildfire Tommy Rich.
Tommy Rich is another guy that doesn't get talked about enough these days. It's in my opinion. Also,
I agree.
I also want to shout out Glow Socks for also joining the Twitch stream.
Hey, Glow Sock.
My friend Aaron, listen to his podcast, Double A Batteries Not Included. And I forget the name of his movie podcast, but go to twitter.com/ GoSox _ and he has the link up there right now. I really forgot what the name of the podcast was. Anyway, Tommy Rich, I just recently saw a match that Tommy Rich had on like WCW main event or pro or something.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like in the early, like 93, 94 or something.
Yeah.
The man never aged. We love you too, Aaron. He said, I love you, Danny Craig.
Thank you, Aaron.
He forgot the name of it too, so just go to Twitter and go Sox. Yeah. I understand him, and him and I both have ADHD like a mother effer, and I understand him. But yeah, Tommy Rich did not age. He never aged. He was a guy that was, from everything that I've seen, and a lot of his career, obviously, 90% of it I saw after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
Man was the same speed he was at the beginning.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to see Tommy Rich at the height of his Tommy Richness in the early 80s when Georgia Championship Wrestling was syndicated, and it was the most popular territory wrestling anywhere. This is at the infancy of the superstation of TBS.
Yeah.
And wrestling, even before the Atlanta Braves became the Atlanta Braves, wrestling was the #1 show on TBS, and they were getting, as Jim Cornette would say, moon landing type numbers every week and every Saturday morning, because they had 2 hours of wrestling. You know, we were used to Saturday morning wrestling for 1 hour, but they had 2 hours in the morning. Then they had a primetime show. They had 2 more hours at night, and Tommy Rich was the head of that, and to the point where he was so popular, he went to Madison Square Garden in 22, and the NWA would only take its top stars, its top regional stars, to wrestle in the Madison Square Garden. Ric Flair, the Von Erichs, Tommy Rich, Austin Idol, because back then the WWF was still a member of the NWA. and Tommy Rich was a big deal. The blonde hair, the smile, you know, he just could not handle the success that he had. Uh, I mentioned last we mentioned on last week's story, and the Tommy Rich played a part in the biggest riot in Memphis history. He went from being the NWA champion to sleeping under a ring for 8 hours with just an air mattress and a six pack. But still, he's Tommy Rich. He made a difference, and he was gritty too. I
And
can say
he
that about
was very gritty. Yes, that is true.
him. Very gritty.
Danielle is requesting that can Tommy Richness be a form of measurement? And I think that's a wonderful idea, and it should be taught in the grade she teaches, which I've forgotten.
Yes, and thank you, Dad, Double D, for being a teacher that you are. My mom's a teacher, so I have always the utmost respect for you. Somebody say something about gritty. That's my Tommy Rich invitation for you, and that's all you get.
That's all you
on
get.
that,
That's it.
yeah. That same date, though, May 1st, while the NWA title was changing hands, the NWA Tag Team Championship was changing hands on that same date in Charlotte. Gene and Ole Anderson would defeat Paul Jones and the Masked Superstar. Significant because that would be the 8th and final time that Gene and Ole Anderson would be the NWA Tag Team Champions. Gene would later, yeah, the Anderson brothers, and you talk about Tommy Rich not getting the credit they deserve.
The
The
Anderson,
Anderson brothers don't get anywhere near the credit they deserve as being one of the greatest heel tag teams in wrestling history. Because I said 8 times NWA Tag Team Champions, but before there was a Ric Flair in the Mid Atlantic, it was the Anderson brothers, and be in the Mid Atlantic or Georgia or Florida when they were NWA Tag Team Champions, the original Minnesota Wrecking Crew. Gene and Ole Anderson were, as far as heel tag teams, it was them, and everyone else was in second. But they had they won their 8th and final NWA Tag Team title the same day the NWA Heavyweight Championship changed hands. Gene and Ole Anderson defeated Paul Jones and the Masked Superstar. That same date, May 1st, 1984, another big title change in NWA history. Tully Blanchard would defeat Mark Youngblood for the NWA TV title. Tully had just debuted in the NWA. He'd come from the Southwest Heavyweight Championship and given a big push already, and he won the NWA television title from Mark Youngblood. Tully would hold that title for another year, and he would turn the NWA title into the World Television title.
Oh, yeah.
And between feuds with Magnum TA, with Dusty Rhodes, even with Ricky Steamboat, he would turn that title into what even more significant than the United States Championship. That's a perfect. Tully Blanchard is a perfect example of a wrestler making a title, just like RVD did with the ECW TV Championship, holding that for a year and making that belt incredibly important. People even ask RVD, "Are you sad you never won the ECW Heavyweight Championship?" Because no, because I made the TV title one of the most important titles in the whole company. Tully Blanchard did this with the NWA television title. He turned it into the World TV title. So when he lost it, it was a big deal because, again, it started May 1st, 1984, but Tully would hold it for another year and a half and would make the NWA TV title a big deal and become a member of the Four Horsemen, become a tag team with Arn Anderson, and would cement his legacy. But it started with the World TV Championship that Tully Blanchard would turn in from a regional title into a big title. But it started May 1st, 1984. May 1st, 1986, during a Saturday night's main event TV taping for the WWF in Providence, Rhode Island. It was taped May 1st, 1986. It wouldn't air until May 3rd. But on this particular Saturday night's main event, Hulk Hogan teamed up with Junkyard Dog to go against the Funks and Jimmy Hart. But the most significant thing that happened on this Saturday night's main event TV taping, Dan, was the DDT heard and felt around the world. This was the Jake Roberts versus Ricky the Dragon Steamboat match that never was. Jake Roberts got to the ring first and had his bag with him with Damien at full attention. And Ricky Steamboat came to the ring, and Jake Roberts attacked him before the match. clotheslined him off the apron when Steamboat was up waving to the crowd, and then Jake proceeded to go down to the arena floor, pick up Ricky Steamboat, and DDT him on the concrete floor. Now Jake and Ricky had talked to each other before the bout and said, "I'm going to DDT you on the concrete. Can you take it?" And Rick said, "Yeah, I can take it." Well, between that conversation and the actual DDT, which I saw when it aired, um, Steamboat's head smacked against the concrete floor. Now, one of the reasons why Ricky Steamboat is in my top 5 greatest wrestlers of all time was his ability to sell. But the way his head hit that concrete, I say they're selling, and then they're selling
And then there's
because
actually selling, yes.
yeah. And so Ricky Steamboat was legitimately knocked out cold. And when Jake Roberts picked him up by the judo jacket and tried to get him in the ring and see that Ricky Steamboat was legitimate dead weight, and how Jake struggled to put him back in the ring, and none of this was planned. This was not the planned finish, where Jake rolled him back in the ring and put the snake in Steamboat's mouth. Ricky Steamboat was legitimately unconscious and does not remember a thing after this. He said, "The last thing I remember was getting up on the ring apron." He didn't remember anything after that. So the DDT that Jake Roberts gave to Ricky Steamboat on the concrete floor was 100% real. The bandana that he wore after that, as part of his dragon character, but it was ideally to hide the huge bump protuberance coming out of his forehead from landing on that on the concrete, and the intense swelling that didn't go down for another month or so. But yeah, that was the DDT heard around the world, May 1st, 1986. May 1st, 1987, the aforementioned Ricky Steamboat. Uh, this is right after WrestleMania, after Ricky Steamboat had won the Intercontinental Championship from Randy Savage, and some people still call it the greatest match in WrestleMania history, one of the greatest matches of all time. Started a lost opportunity for the WWF because May 1st, 1987 was the first of a series of steel cage matches between Ricky Steamboat and Randy Savage that weren't taped, that weren't filmed for future use, and it became a part of urban legend, like Wilt Chamberlain or Babe Ruth. Unless you saw it there, you couldn't experience it. Well, Ricky Steamboat and Randy Savage had a cage match in Uniondale, Long Island, that people are still talking about as one of the greatest matches that they've ever seen, and only lives now in still photography. But was told was absolutely amazing. But that took place May 1st, 1987, and May 1st, 1990. That same date was a turning point in the NWA WCW franchise, because that was a day, and of all places, in a TV taping in Rainsville, Alabama, May 1st, 1990 was the return to the NWA of one Paul E. Dangerously.
Oh, yeah.
This would be Paul E's second run, and this would start off Paul E's epic run as a heel manager. He would form the Dangerous Alliance, having under his charge Arn Anderson, Larry Zbyszko, a great Rick Rude, and a very young, stunning Steve Austin.
Who else? Did we leave out Bobby?
Bobby Eaton. I apologize. Bobby Eaton.
Whew, I was gonna say, is my memory effed up? I don't remember.
No. Bobby Eaton, Larry Zbyszko, Arn Anderson, Rick Rude, and a very young, stunning Steve Austin. They would form the Dangerous Alliance, and to me, they were a better heel faction than the Horsemen, because you had 5 of the. There was not a stinker in the bunch. There was no Lex Luger in that stable. Every one of those guys could go. Every one of those guys could talk. And you had Medusa later on, but the Dangerous Alliance, head by Paul E. Dangerously, Paul Heyman, he would later go on to be an announcer and then a booker, and that would set him up to later do that same thing with ECW 3 years later. But Paul Heyman's return to the NWA May 1st, 1990 would really set his career path upwards, and it's never really slowed down since then. But it started May 1st, 1990, 30 years ago this week. May 2nd um, would have been Big Bubba Boss Man Ray Trailer's 57th birthday. So we say happy belated birthday to the late great Ray Trailer, Big Bubba Boss Man, the boss.
I never called him Big Bubba. It was Big Boss Man.
But Jim Cornette will always consider him a member of the Midnight Express because of his he was hired by Dusty when he wrestled as Ray Trailer, big 6'8" guy, and could as soon as he saw him take a slingshot suplex from Tully Blanchard, a guy that Ray was a foot taller than, but he took it, and Dusty said we could do something with this guy. And back then, Jim Cornette legitimately needed a bodyguard because the house shows were getting out of control with fans attacking him while he sat at ringside or stood at ringside. Chief among them right here in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
So it had twofold. It got Jim Cornette some legitimate protection, and you got a huge monster heel. And
except for when he needed to catch him.
Yes. You were there for Jim Cornette everywhere except when he fell off a scaffold.
He actually needed him. He wasn't there.
Then he actually did need him. Yeah. Every other time when Big Bubba stood at ringside with Jim Cornette, no one touched Jim Cornette. Because Ray Trailer was not the one to be trifled with. Just don't ask him to catch anyone, and you'll be fine.
He was a mile away. He wasn't even close.
And he yelled, and Jim Cornette even yelled out when he fell, "Catch me!"
The sound that man makes when he hits the goddamn mat.
Whew.
Whew, man. Oh, that sucks.
It does indeed. May 2nd, 1984. We're 3 months into Hulkamania, where it's still running wild. After Hogan's win over the Iron Sheik that year in January of that year, Hulk Hogan selling out everywhere, and one of them was in White Plains, New York, at the Westchester Civic Center, where Hulk Hogan went to a double countout with Dr. D, David Schultz.
Nice.
Yeah, so that was part of Hogan's epic run of healed and sold out crowds, and Dr. D, David Schultz was one of them. Back when everything was still cool. That was May 2nd, 1984. May 2nd, that same date, 1987, in San Francisco, California, Curt Hennig, with a little help from Larry Zbyszko outside the ring, would defeat Nick Bockwinkel for the AWA Heavyweight Championship. This would be the first and only world title in Curt Hennig's career, and it would be the last time that Nick Bockwinkel would ever be the AWA Heavyweight Champion. And Bockwinkel, who held the title off and on since 1975, 12 years. But that would be the last time he would hold it, May 2nd, 1987.
Aaron, anybody else who's watching right now, if you have not seen a match or a promo or any material about Nick Bockwinkel, I beg of thee, do so.
Yeah.
Please do. The stuff with Bobby, anything from Nick Bockwinkel.
Yeah.
It's funny because Nick Bockwinkel, I knew as a young kid when he was WCW commissioner. He was brought in as commissioner. I have to remember to bring the mic up to my mouth when I'm talking. That would help. And this wrestling legend, and it wasn't until years later, for me personally, I went back and tried to see as much as possible. And even later on, when the AWA DVD came out, I was able to catch up even more on the greatness that was Nick Bockwinkel. God damn it, he was so good, and he was the amazing promo. And he never yelled, he never screamed. Rarely did he ever lose his composure, and he was just a jerk off heel. But he just talked you out of your chair into the arena with just normal cadence, I've never seen anything else like it. There's literally been nobody since Nick Bockwinkel. There's never been another one.
No, and there'll never be another one. And for
Oh,
everyone, if you when you go back, like Dan just instructed you to do, to watch old Nick Bockwinkel tapes of Nick Bockwinkel promos, standing there with the big, huge AWA title and a suit, he was doing it first
yes.
before Ric Flair
Yep.
ever held a title in a world in a nice suit and talked about how good he looked. It was Nick Bockwinkel before everyone else. Okay, and you had not only the greatest talking world champion at the time against with the greatest manager of all time. You had two guys that just knew each other so well and just knew how to get under the skin of every fan in the AWA, be it St. Paul, Minnesota, or Chicago, Illinois, or Green Bay, Wisconsin. When Nick Bockwinkel came into that ring with the slick back hair, the movie star good looks, that the suits, and just the air, the posture, him, Bobby, and Gene Okerlund doing an AWA promo is classic professional wrestling. There is, and nothing says class. No one puts the class in classic like Nick Bockwinkel. I guess this is a theme about people not getting the respect they deserve. Tommy Rich, Gene and Ole Anderson, Nick Bockwinkel, top of the list because he talked about world champions. And again, 12 years from the time he first held it to the time he lost it, Nick Bockwinkel put asses in the seats. Had Vern Gagne had any type of forethought, you know why he never put the belt on Hogan, because of such loyalty to Nick Bockwinkel, because of how much money Nick Bockwinkel made the AWA, how many sellouts Nick Bockwinkel had in the AWA, why he wouldn't take the title from him and put it on Hogan. You can see that, but again, business is business. Um,
He was
Hogan is,
miles, miles over Hogan in
yeah,
every way fathomable. I understand Hogan's place in wrestling history as bringing wrestling from this point to that point. Get it? Respect that. A lot of guys were miles away from him, but Bockwinkel especially miles away from him in the other direction.
yeah, and Hogan would tell you that, but
Yeah,
Vern, out of loyalty to Nick, uh, kept the belt on Bockwinkel despite the immense popularity of Hogan. You can see his attachment to Bockwinkel, why his loyalty to Bockwinkel, but I business would have been business, and if Hogan had been AWA champion, had Vern not had loyalty to Bockwinkel, the AWA may still be around, and the WWF would have had to look somewhere else to fill the void after Backlund lost his championship.
yeah.
But and by the way, this is Kurt Hennig's moment. By the way, Kurt Hennig was the one that won the world title
I know. Sorry,
from Nick Bockwinkel.
but we talk about Kurt. Kurt's another one that should have been world. We talked about. Well, to be fair, we talked about this last week.
Yeah,
Kurt should have been world champion,
yeah,
without question. Period. End of story. He was again miles away from most. So
mhm,
many miles. Words do not do justice how good Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig was. It
anyway.
just so happens that I focused on Nick Bockwinkel when you mentioned that name. Last week
Yeah,
I blew Kurt Hennig. Now I'm blowing Nick. You know,
exactly. Everyone will get their chance. Okay, we'll
everyone
just
gets
line
the
them up.
blow. Everyone eventually gets a blowjob.
Yes, that's the theme of our show. Um,
Huh?
the other what?
What?
The other theme is travel, because I know one of the themes of this particular segment of the Wrestling Historian is so many the travel that went into wrestling back in the day. Because I'm going to mention several dates here, and well, there's different uh, wrestling events going on at the same time. This is how big professional wrestling was back in the day, kids. Because while Kurt Hennig was winning the AWA title from Nick Bockwinkel in San Francisco, in the Boston Garden, there was a full WWF card that was also broadcast on the Northeast Sports, the New England Sports Network, the NESN. Um, Back then, they would, like Sports Channel, and there was the New York Sports Network,
Yeah,
but
it
in the
was
New England
yes, and then
Sports
there
Network,
was Nesson. Yeah,
NESN.
I didn't know
This was
they aired
brought,
wrestling.
yeah, and the Boston Garden.
Oh
Hulk
yeah,
Hogan defeated Harley Race, and the Hart Foundation would defeat the British Bulldogs by disqualification.
Boo.
On that same day, while that was happening, while the AWA title changed hands in San Francisco, WWF was in Boston on the Nessa network. In Chicago was another Ricky Steamboat versus Randy Savage steel cage match, and this one was better than the one in Uniondale. This one I remember seeing pictures of in the steel cage. Randy Savage had gone over the cage, and Ricky Steamboat had stopped him. And you see pictures of Ricky Steamboat holding up Randy Savage only by his hair,
Mm.
and you see Randy Savage's arms and legs not even touching the cage, and Steamboat held him there so Savage wouldn't escape. And that match, some will say, miles, like you were saying about Pac Michael, miles ahead of their WrestleMania match in the Silverdome. The Ricky Steamboat Randy Savage series of cage matches that were never filmed, that were never recorded. Okay, that it was a huge lost opportunity. You could, even if you just want to sell them on Coliseum videos, never put them on free TV ever. Do it, man. I'll throw money at the screen
Yeah,
to get any of those matches.
absolutely.
But the Ricky Steamboat Randy Savage matches were never recorded, and only live in still photography and from the people that were actually there. So if you were in the Chicago at the Rosemont Horizon, May 2nd, 1987, to see Ricky Steamboat Randy Savage, I for one envy you, sir or madam, because you saw what I can only gather is history from their match from WrestleMania. They took it up a notch. I think they took it to 11 in those cage matches. Also, happy belated birthday on May 2nd. Happy 48th birthday to a young man who's done good for himself in professional wrestling. Some would say if he had stuck with football, he might have had a different career, but wasn't in the cards. So happy belated 48th birthday to one Dwayne Johnson.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't
We
in
all
the
know.
cards.
Yeah, we all know it's Rocky Maivia.
Who?
And, wonder what? Yeah, when he wore a great hair, had a great outfit,
He
kind
had
of a
such
Chip
a
and Dale kind.
he had such a promising career and it went nowhere.
Yeah,
Acting.
yeah. So, but happy 48th birthday to that
He's
guy.
48.
48, May 2nd, 1972, was born a Dwayne Johnson. I believe it was in Allentown or Hawaii that he was born.
What? I think he was born in Hawaii but lived in Allentown for a while.
Yeah, I know he lived in Allentown. I didn't know if he was born there or not. But
I think it's
yeah.
the other way around.
May 3rd, big date in professional wrestling. First of all, Stu Hart would have been 95. May 3rd, had he.
But he didn't have the discipline. I'm sorry. So sorry.
Yeah, I guess haven't needed somebody tough up there, or needed somebody to get on their knees and scream. So
Aaron's
Stu
still
was
watching.
awesome.
Here's another call out to you, Aaron. More footage you need to look up. Look up the Wrestling with Shadows documentary if you've not
Yeah.
seen it. There's great footage of. I always tell Aaron about. I love talking to him about modern wrestling, but older wrestling when the guys when Regal wasn't the only one who could actually stretch you and kill you.
No.
William Regal, Darren is his real name.
Mhm.
Regal was a shooter. Malenko was taught as a shooter.
Yeah.
Stu Hart taught his children to be shooters.
Yes.
Stu Hart at 70 would take these kids down to the dungeon, the Hart dungeon in their basement at their home, and just basically torture them into respecting the business. I'm not talking about physical abuse, or slapping them around like Vern. Who trained Vader was Vern. Was you slapped around and hey.
Yeah. Back then there was different schools of wrestling. If you want to be a wrestler, he could run you to death like Vern Gagne did with Flair and Steamboat running up 10-story buildings in Ken Patera and all day.
Yeah.
And running tracks, or the Dave Schultz.
That's it.
Herb Welch. Where they would just take you into a barn and beat the living crap out of you every day.
Yeah.
And then there was the Stu Hart method where he would teach you wrestling holds.
By teaching you, he would put them in there.
Yes. until they screamed.
But
And Bret Hart would talk about trying to go to sleep as a child
and all you hear in the basement is
to the screams of grown men like professional athletes, football players, soccer players, the Saskatchewan Roughriders, the Canadian football team. Stu Hart would stretch them one by one.
I mean, this kid in this documentary, it was filmed around 97, but this kid's like, "You're going to show me some wrestling moves, sir? We're going to go get some wrestling moves." He's following little waddling old Stu Hart into the basement. I'll show you some things. Cut to him on the ground, this kid on the ground with old Stu Hart having him tied up, like his one limb over here and his leg back there and his other arm up his ass. And Stu Hart just stretching his abdominal muscles like this, sitting in there. And then what I love is what Keith talks about, where you'd hear silence and you knew he said he knew Dad was cinching up on him, and he'd just move his arm, and you just see in the video, he's got this kid twisted, and he just moves his arm to the other direction, and it adds another point of pressure, and you just hear the guy scream, go, "Ah!"
And please, sir, please, sir, please.
Please, sir, please. Oh, sir, I can't feel my tongue. I can't feel my face.
And Stu Hart has never been more calm. As he's admitting so much pain, he goes, "Okay, well, that's just
that's where have some discipline." He's telling him to have some discipline while he's getting twisted in 4 directions. Kiss my ass, let me go. Oh man, that used to make me laugh. Maybe I'm a sadist, but that would be funny to me. Oh my god, just I've never seen somebody with such a deep voice go 8 octaves higher without a kick in the balls before.
It was hard. Would have been 85. Another story. Jim Cornette told a story about Gene Anderson. I mentioned him earlier with Ole and Gene Anderson, the Anderson brothers. Gene Anderson was another guy that his grip strength was like incredibly intense, and he was also taught in the shooting type ways. The Barbarian, one of the big hulking guys, one of the legitimate tough guys that you would ever know. They were at a concession stand or getting ice cream or soda or something like that, and Gene Anderson just came up to him and said, "Hey," and Barbarian towered over Gene Anderson. But Gene, just with 2 of his fingers, I think, put it under his elbow or on the crook of his bicep, and had the Barbarian on his knees. The Barbarian, the legitimate tough guys in the business. And Gene was like, "So are you a bitch?" He goes, "Yes, I'm a bitch. I'm sorry." Yeah. So, and just again with 2 fingers. So yeah, guys like Gene Anderson, Stu Hart. Yeah, and this is when Gene Anderson was at the end of his career, where like Stu, the amount of wear and tear on his body had physically crippled him, to the point where he couldn't walk without assistance. But even without being able to walk, like Stu Hart and like Gene Anderson, just with enough pressure and even 2 fingers, they can bring the toughest man to his knees and up about 8 octaves.
That's what they always talk about when they talk about the Montreal Screwjob is they were trying to tell Sean how to protect himself in case Bret decided to turn, because chip off the old block, old Bret Hart was, for lack of better terms, Southpaw. Hi. Oop. Sorry. Almost, I know you're not, keep it kayfabe, sir. Southpaw, Fourth Line is watching us on Twitter live. So we got viewers everywhere now.
Nice.
My plan is forming. But Stu taught all of his kids, of course, and Bret being the chip off the old block, when they were decided, hey, we're going to screw him. Mm-hmm. They were trying to teach Sean what to do if Bret decided to turn around and go, okay, just hold him.
Well, and that's also, Dan, they did that backstage before the match, but that's also why there were so many, why Slaughter, Jerry Briscoe, and we're all out there just in case Bret did do it. So not only did they tell Sean ahead of time, try to teach Sean stuff, They went out there for
Oh
the
god.
express purposes. People thought, oh, they're WWE officials. No, they were there to protect Shawn Michaels' ass.
In case
Slaughter,
in case Brett turned around and was like, "You're not getting out of here, mother effer."
yeah. That's why Jerry Briscoe was there. That's why Slaughter was there.
Oh man.
Um, yeah, to
Oh.
protect Shawn Michaels. But Brett, to his credit, as always, and he's very proud of the fact he's never hurt anyone in the ring. And because as much as he didn't like Shawn Michaels, he knows how good their matches are in the ring, and that there would never be any need for him to actually shoot on Shawn.
I wonder if it ever occurred to Sean afterwards how he could have died that day.
Well, that's why he kept telling Brett he didn't know anything about
I
it.
didn't know anything. I didn't know anything. Please, I gotta get out of here.
Yeah, to save his own ass, because
Yeah.
obviously he knew if Brett didn't buy that
I'm dead.
after Vince got knocked out, Shawn was next. So,
Wow.
but yeah, happy belated birthday, Stu Hart. On that same date, Dan,
Yes.
we're gonna go back further. May 3rd, 1946. Okay, May 3rd, 1946, in Houston, Texas, Lou Thez defeated Buddy Rogers for the NWA Texas Heavyweight title.
Texas heavyweight title.
Now, that was 17 years before their NWA title run that would result in Buddy Rogers leaving the NWA to become the very first WWF Heavyweight Champion. So
Oh wow.
they started back 1940. This is 17 years before their NWA title changes and the controversy. So those two, Lou Thez and Buddy Rogers, they go back quite a ways. But that was in 1946 where Lou Thez defeated Buddy Rogers for the Texas Heavyweight title. And those two men would rise up through the ranks and become the two best wrestlers in the NWA. Both will become multiple NWA champions. Thez will hold it 6 times. And the Lou Thez title win over Buddy Rogers in the NWA wasn't recognized by the Northeast promoters. Because they wanted Rogers to stay in the Northeast, and Rogers himself didn't want to be the NWA traveling champion. He wanted to stay in the Northeast. They would leave the NWA and would start their own Worldwide Wrestling Federation company and have Rogers as their first world champion. But that was after a controversial match with Lou Thez. So Thez and Rogers will forever be linked. But 1946, Lou Thez beat Buddy for the NWA Texas Heavyweight title. Also gives you an idea how far back Texas wrestling goes and how fervent the Texas wrestling fans are, because we've got some big doings in Texas this week in wrestling.
Oh boy.
Because exactly 41 years later, May 3rd, 1987, in Texas, it would be the 4th annual World Class Parade of Champions.
Jeez.
At this point, it was called the Von Erich Memorial Parade of Champions, because this particular Parade of Champions took place just 3 weeks after the death of Mike Von Erich. And while the first Clash of Champions at Texas Stadium had the NWA champion, there was no Ric Flair in this Parade of Champions at Texas Stadium. Kevin Von Erich, who was a World Class Heavyweight champion, would go up against Nord the Barbarian, and that would end in a double count out. So there wasn't even a clear-cut victor. And unfortunately, this particular run at Texas Stadium looked more like a Herb Abrams production.
Ooh.
Because you had this huge stadium and a very small crowd. Not obviously the first Texas Stadium show was a lot bigger for that Parade of Champions, and this one. And the reason why there was no NWA champion at that Texas Parade of Champions in 1987, because the NWA champion Ric Flair was wrestling twice that day. And he defeated Jimmy Garvin, who was also in the first Parade of Champions at Texas Stadium in Charleston, West Virginia. And then later on that night, he would defeat Jimmy Garvin in Cincinnati, Ohio. So all those matches took place on one day in 1987 in Texas, the Von Erich Memorial Parade of Champions. And Ric Flair would defeat Jimmy Garvin in Charleston, West Virginia, and in Cincinnati, Ohio, on that same day. May 3rd, 1993, Wrestling Dontaku 93. I know Dontaku means something in Japanese. I don't know what. It's spelled Dontaku. Wrestling Dontaku 93 in the Fukuoka Dome.
Easy for you to say.
55,000 people were there, and the main event was the IWGP champion, the Great Muta, going up against the WWF Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan.
It's a good match, actually.
It was a good match. It had the longest running clothesline in professional wrestling history, where Muta left the ring and Hogan ran up the aisle in an arena with 55,000 people in it, and clothesline Muta about 20 to 30 feet away. In the pre-show, Hulk Hogan called the IWGP belt, a title that he was the very first champion, the very first IWGP champion. Hulk Hogan was. He called the IWGP belt the real World Championship, and nothing compared to the WWF title. This got back to the States and the WWF mainstream press, and Hogan claimed that he was mistranslated.
Yeah. That's not how that works.
No, but it's like Charles Barkley saying he was misquoted in his own autobiography that he wrote.
But I take Barkley's side about the Michael Jordan thing, by the way.
Oh yeah, I do too.
Thank you.
But that was that made the Pro Wrestling Illustrated because it was Hulk Hogan, a WWF champion, wrestling an IWGP champion, and that Great Muta was still loosely associated with the NWA, so that was a huge deal. And even made the cover of Pro Wrestling Illustrated with Hulk Hogan calling the IWGP belt the real world title.
Great match. Go see it if you can. It's out there.
Yes, Hulk. You can't say the word "great match" and Hulk Hogan in the same sentence a lot, but that one was definitely one of them.
That's the thing. Like that's the thing with Hogan, and I'll say he was crap, but he wasn't really he wasn't crap. I don't understand. Yeah, I'm talking about before injuries. I'm talking about before the back and the knee was a real problem and he couldn't bend over, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. It happens when with wear and tear in that way. Before that, he got lazy at one point.
Yeah, and it might have been the travel, and it might have been just the routine of it. And speaking of Nick Bockwinkel, go back and watch old AWA Hulk Hogan.
Yeah,
his matches with Bockwinkel and David Schultz. That guy could move. The Hulk Hogan throw the guy into the turnbuckle and running clothesline. He was as quick as Terry Gordy with that running clothesline. Hogan was not always, the Hogan we know. The Hogan in the early '80s, the AWA Hogan, the first year Hulkamania
even the Hogan in the late '80s in the WWF is a different Hogan for the most part.
Mm-hmm. That he was.
Good.
Staying on that same date, May 3rd, 1998, Dan, in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, and the WWF house show, I should say. Adam Copeland defeated Christian Cage in Christian Cage WWF wrestling debut. The very first match for Christian Cage in the WWF. He lost to Adam Copeland, May 3rd, 1998. They would go on to debut later on that year. Edge would debut in June, and Christian would debut in September of that year. But they got their very first start. Two men that were indelibly etched in the WWF history would go on to win 7 tag team championships, have some of the greatest matches of all time with both the Dudley Boys and the Hardy Boys, and they would both become world champions. Edge, more successful than Christian, but Christian would later get his due. But they were always going to be linked. Obviously, best friends from when they were in grade school, and that they're one of the great enduring friendships in wrestling because there's not a whole lot of them. But Adam Copeland and Jay Rizzo, Christian Cage, would have their very first match together in the WWF, May 3rd, 1998.
He wasn't billed as Sexton Hardcastle?
No.
Oh, damn it!
It was a house show. It was a dark match. So he was Adam Copeland.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Christian's first match. And speaking of first and last, on that same date, while that was going on in Hamilton, Ontario, and Cobb County Civic Center in Georgia, ECW would hold its WrestlePalooza 98 pay-per-view. Um, it did a 0.24 buy rate that Herb Abrams would have killed for, and there was 3,400 fans, which for an ECW show is damn good.
Not bad.
Again, numbers that Herb Abrams would have killed for. They billed it
Snorted
as a
coke for it.
Legends ceremony. They honored some of the legends of Georgia Championship Wrestling: Dick Slater, Bob Armstrong, the Assassin, and in his final appearance, his final public appearance before his death, Junkyard Dog.
Oh wow.
Unfortunately, before the bout, he got into a fight with New Jack. Apparently, New Jack believed that Junkyard Dog owed him some money, that JYD had no idea what he was talking about. They got into a fight. So, in Junkyard Dog's last public appearance, he came to the ring to be honored, and he had bandages on his lip and on his head from the fight he had with New Jack before.
News to me.
And you didn't know? Oh, I thought you knew
No,
that. Yeah.
never knew that.
Go back to WrestlePalooza 98 on the ECW pay-per-view when Junkyard Dog comes out to shake hands with the fans. He's got bandages on his lip from a fight he had with New Jack backstage because apparently New Jack thought that JYD owed him some money.
That seems kind of random, New Jack. I mean, with all due respect, sir, please don't kill me.
Yeah. But obviously Junkyard Dog had no idea what he was talking about. They got into a fight. And in a bit of karmic justice, Bam Bam Bigelow defeated New Jack later on that night when New Jack knocked himself out when he jumped off the balcony. It was one of the bouts showing in the Dark Side of the Ring edition of New Jack, The Life and Crimes of New Jack, when New Jack went off the balcony against Bam Bam, and he knocked himself out. So, in that bit of karmic justice. And I've always I just kind of resented New Jack for that because that would be the last time we would see Junkyard Dog, and he would have scars all over him because of a fight he got into with New Jack backstage.
I'll say this: I prefer Smoky Mountain New Jack, the Gangsters. I prefer the Smoky Mountain Gangsters over ECW. I mean, ECW is the same thing. Oh, I know I'm going to catch heat because you can't say anything negative about ECW. But it was just the same thing over and over and over again. And there was flashes of brilliance with New Jack in ECW, but I'll take Smoky Mountain New Jack over anything any day.
You have to understand the gravity of New Jack's promos were so great that pre-internet and only newsletter, you have to hear it. He said, "What?"
He excuse me?
And I would be reading it in the newsletter or heard about it from somebody else. Wait a minute, he said, "What about OJ?" and his legend was growing in Smoky Mountain because keep in mind, Smoky Mountain was just an upstart. I was a huge Jim Cornette fan, and I couldn't see Smoky Mountain wrestling unless it was when I traded tapes with folks when I went to ECW matches.
Right.
And I only saw the Smoky Mountain talent like the Bruise Brothers, or New Jack or Chris Candido when they would come to the ECW. So I was hearing about New Jack only in hearsay, and I only saw the promos for the first time on the tapes that I got that were just copied over that were really bad sound quality. But the first time I saw clear as bell was on the Dark Side of the Ring documentary on New Jack.
Footage,
but his promos were gold. Smoky Mountain New Jack was the best version of New Jack, and then he's gone downhill from there. But that was May 3rd, 1998.
With all due respect, sir.
With all due respect to New Jack. May the 4th be with you. May the 4th, 1994. The very next year, wrestling Dantaku. Remember I said wrestling Dantaku 93 featured Hulk Hogan and the Great Muta, WWF champion and the IWGP champion. Well, this wrestling Dantaku in the Fukuoka Dome had 53,000 people in it. It didn't have Hulk Hogan, but it did have the WCW International Heavyweight Championship match. That's the big gold belt that Rick Rude defeated Sting And
Oh wait,
unfortunately,
yeah, I
this
just
would be
watched this.
Rick Rude's final wrestling match ever. The way that the ring was set up, it was on a stage, and it was on a
Oh,
riser. So when Sting did a dive onto Rick Rude on the outside, when Rude caught him and fell back, Rude's neck hit the very edge of the stage and would permanently injure Rude's neck. And because Rude is in one tough SOB, he would finish the match and would defeat Sting, but unfortunately would never wrestle again.
oh God.
Um, he had to give up the international belt, and we wouldn't see Rick Rude again until 4 years later in the ECW. And but as luck would have it, and because of Rick Rude being Rick Rude, I'm gonna say Rick Rude became even more popular and was seen by more people after his career ended, because not only did his return to ECW put him back on the map, but he later became a member of DX, and then later a member of the NWO, and became the first man in professional wrestling history to appear on both Monday Night Raw and Monday Nitro on the same night.
You know what's great about that one is what people don't usually pay attention to is, yes, he appeared on Nitro and Raw the same night, but he was also on ECW that week
That's true.
because it was
Yes,
taped. So
because
he
of the
was
tape.
literally on every single big wrestling network show. I think ECW wasn't on a network at the
Yeah,
time, but that same week. That's amazing.
yes. So Rick Rude's wrestling career may have ended, his in-ring career may have ended, but it jump-started his out-of-the-ring career, and again, it was probably even more popular since his career ended. But his final match was May the 4th, 1994, in Japan in the
Good
Fukuoka
match.
Dome.
It's a damn good
In front
match
of,
too.
damn good match in front of 53,000 people. Which brings us to today, Daniel. Maybe one of the most significant days in professional wrestling history. I know I said at the beginning, okay, but here we are at the end, and still this date, what happened on this date today, May 6th, blows my mind in professional wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
Folks, gentlemen and ladies that are listening, 1984 is my favorite year in professional wrestling, but my favorite year of my life because so many things happened. But May 6th, 1984, the year 1984 was my favorite year in all of wrestling. When I let you know what happened on this date in wrestling history.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We start off May 6th, 1984, in Texas Stadium, the very first Parade of Champions, the David Von Erich Memorial wrestling card. 44,000 people would set a record, then would be the largest amount of people to see a professional wrestling match
Yeah.
before the WWF. This is in Texas Stadium, where Kerry Von Erich would pin Ric Flair to win the NWA heavyweight title, fulfilling the promise that his brother David, who had died 3 months earlier, uh, some believe and still believe that he would eventually would have been NWA champion, but Kerry Von Erich would fulfill the destiny. And one of the most emotional wins in wrestling history would defeat Ric Flair for the NWA title with a backslide. Story on that later.
I love it.
To become the NWA heavyweight champion
With a backslide.
with a backslide. The same move that Ric Flair has kicked out of countless times, but this
This
one
time he
was
did
special.
not.
So that took place in Texas Stadium in Irving, Texas, May 6, 1984. That same day in Atlanta, Georgia, King Kong Bundy, the Masked Superstar, would defeat the Road Warriors for the National Tag Team Championship. That same night in Green Bay, Wisconsin, Crusher and Baron Von Raschke would defeat Ken Patera and Crusher Blackwell for the AWA Tag Team title. Why was
Ooh.
that? Why was that significant? Because the Road Warriors would eventually defeat Crusher and Baron Von Raschke for the AWA title, but they couldn't do that while they were the National Tag Team Champions. So, Texas, NWA title changed hands. Atlanta, National Tag Team title changed hands. Green Bay, the AWA Tag Team title changed hands. And that same day, Jim Crockett ran 3 cards on the same day. In Savannah, Georgia, you had Tully Blanchard defending the NWA TV title against Pez Wadley. The Boogie Woogie Man Jimmy Valiant going against Exotic Adrian Street, and Ernie Ladd defeated Rufus
Yes.
R. Jones. In Asheville, North Carolina, Wahoo McDaniel and Mark Youngblood, the NWA Tag Team Champions, will go up against the Briscoe Brothers. And that night
Yes.
in Charlotte, again, this is the same day, May 6, 1984. Tully Blanchard would defend the TV title against Boogie Woogie Man Jim Valiant, and the United States champion Ricky Steamboat would defeat Dick Slater for the United States belt. Would defend the title against Dick Slater for the United States belt. All that took place on the same day, May 6, 1984. And all that took place in Texas, Atlanta, Green Bay, Savannah, Georgia, Asheville, North Carolina, and Charlotte. All of those venues all sold out. Yeah. So all that took place on the same day.
They don't make them like they used to.
No, that was back in 1984, where you can go all across the country, and any given day you could see sold out matches, top flight talent, and just unbelievable crowd noise. When Bundy and Masked Superstar defeated the Road Warriors, who at that time had been unbeatable, it was considered a huge upset. But we now know it's because the Road Warriors are headed to the AWA, and Crusher and Van Ron Raschke, two guys that had been far past their prime, but this was another Vern move, defeating a younger team like Crusher Blackwell and Ken Patera to put the belts on Crusher and Van Ron Raschke, whose best days were well behind them, but they needed to set up for the Road Warriors. And Jim Crockett's promotion was going crazy. The NWA champion wasn't even there, but they still sold out NWA venues in Savannah, Asheville, and Charlotte, using guys like Ricky Steamboat, Tully Blanchard, who had just started his NWA TV title reign, and the NWA Tag Team Champions, Wahoo McDaniel and Mark Youngblood, were defending against the Briscoes in Asheville, and then later on that night in Charlotte. And if that weren't enough, and by God, I said about the backslide. Ric Flair and Kerry Von Erich had wrestled each other at least 100 to 200 times. And Ric Flair and Jerry Lawler both said the same thing about Kerry Von Erich. Both wrestled Kerry Von Erich many times. Loved the guy, great to work with, but Kerry was always impaired, it seemed, especially in big matches.
Yeah.
So for all those who wondered why Ric Flair, out of all the times, couldn't kick out of a backslide, because when Ric Flair and Kerry Von Erich would go over their matches, and Ric Flair detailed this in his book, and Jerry Lawler to a lesser degree detailed it in his book, they go over the finish with Flair, and Flair was not someone who liked to call matches and call spots in the ring.
No.
He'd get together with the guy beforehand and say, "This is how we, this is how we go home. Everything else we'll just do." And they would go over the finish, and Kerry would say, "I got it." Okay, what was it again? Okay, oh yeah, I got it. About 10 minutes later, he walked by Flair. So Rick, what was the finish? Yeah, and right up until the match itself, he would ask someone else to go to Rick and ask him what the finish was again. So for this match at Texas Stadium, May 6, 1984, the biggest match in front of the biggest crowd they would ever have, Rick just went to Kerry and gave him a move that, in Ric Flair's words, even you can't mess up. We're going to end with a We're going to end with a backslide. Because in the history of Rick and Kerry matches, Rick would talk about, Kerry would put the claw hold on a minute into the match when it was supposed to be at the end. He give it too early. One match where he would have Flair's arm down, and he was going to do a handstand and come down on Flair's arm with his knee. But in one match, Kerry did a handstand and just went over and fell on his back. And the announcers had to sell it that he was wringing Flair's arm, where in fact Kerry had just lost his balance. And obviously the Jerry Lawler Kerry Von Erich match at Super Clash, where Kerry, also being impaired, sliced his bicep open before the match even started in the dressing room, and they had to cover that up because, again, it was Kerry was impaired. So the reason why Flair won with the backslide, because Flair picked a move that, even in his words, Kerry can't mess up. We're going to end with a backslide, and that's how Kerry Von Erich defeated Ric Flair for the NWA Heavyweight title, May 6, 1984, in Texas Stadium in front of 44,000 people in the first annual Parade of Champions. But on the same date, as much as that happened, all that great run in 1984 that same day, draft struck on this same day, May 6th, 2002. And the thing was, Dan, this didn't take place in a ring, didn't take place in a particular city, and it didn't even take place on land. Because May 6th, 2002 was the flight. The flight, for those of you who don't know,
Oh, the flight.
The flight.
Yes, that flight. Got it. Mm-hmm.
For those of you unfamiliar with the flight in WWE history, more things took. If one of these things took place, there would be enough for grounds for a dismissal. But so many.
They all took place.
They all took place. Scott Hall was inebriated to the point where he couldn't be awakened, so he was fired. Goldust had so much to drink that he got on the plane's PA system and begged and pleaded for his wife at the time, Terry Runnels, to take him back.
I love you. I'm sorry I hit you. Please.
Ric Flair was parading up and down the aisle wearing nothing but a robe.
No, that's just a Tuesday for Rick.
Yeah, a robe that wasn't fastened securely. Michael Hayes fell asleep and had his hair cut, which is what you don't do to Michael Hayes under any circumstances. And Kurt Hennig and Brock Lesnar decided to find out who was the best wrestler in Minnesota state history by having an amateur match on the plane, to the point where they were shoved against the emergency door and nearly opened it, thus almost killing everyone on board.
It's funny because they're okay. Well, Brock's okay.
Yeah. But all that took place on the same flight.
So who won that fight?
Depending on who you ask, and the story has become, now that should be a dark side of the ring. The flight. That's
the flight,
one.
yeah.
Because so many different people have different accounts of what actually happened. Kurt Hennig, and we've talked about him before. You fans of HIAC Talk Radio know we blew him last week. That Kurt Hennig was a guy that always liked to test himself against other men for some reason. The vignettes you saw him do when he was had other athletes and he was doing the Mr. Perfect stuff, he really did, and he really wanted to prove against other athletes. There was a story of him running into Steven Seagal in an airport and shook hands with Steven and gave him the grip to try to, find out and how tough he was, and Seagal repeatedly pulled his hand back. But he and Brock would go against, and Brock, even the common denominator, he got in the same type of arguments with Kurt Angle about who was a better amateur.
The one that won the gold medals.
Yeah. And yeah, there's
with a broken freaking neck. You're welcome.
But Kurt and Brock had a legitimate, because they both grew up in Minnesota, and they both competed in the NCAA tournaments. And some of the records that Brock broke were Kurt's records in Minnesota. So, and Kurt, being Kurt, like you said, like to test himself, and said, "Well, we were back in the day. I would have killed you. I would have pinned you. Wouldn't have broken any of my record because I would have pinned your ass." And Brock, being Brock, he said, "Well, if you think you can pin my ass then, you can pin my ass now. So let's find out." So okay, let's wrestle on a plane. So yeah, these big guys that weren't in college anymore, big, legitimate 250-pound athletes, decided to go at it on a plane. To amateur wrestling, which turned into shoving, which turned into an actual fight, which turned into them getting backed up into the emergency door handle and it being bent under pressure from both of those men and the amount of guys trying to pull them apart. So at first you had a 250-pound guy and another 250-pound guy pressing on the handle, and you had 3 or 4 more 250-pound guys pressing on them to get them away from the door, all proceed to break the emergency or to bend the emergency handle on the plane. Thankfully didn't open. Again, costing the lives, but all that happened on the flight.
The
Um,
flight.
on this date, May 6, 2002.
It's an effed up flight when it's the flight. When all these
Yeah.
other flights are flying that day, that's the flight.
Hmm. Yeah. Michael Hayes and I believe Sean Waldman still haven't spoken. He Michael Hayes has always suspected Sean is the one that cut his hair. Sean's never copped to it, but he was the only one standing behind him. I mean, standing behind him on the flight.
That's amazing.
But yeah, Michael Hayes has always been protective about it. Yeah, Sean said I didn't do it, but you were in the seat right behind me. Yeah. But Michael Hayes has always been protective about his hair. The Freebirds have done at least 2 angles where Terry Gordy was supposed to cut his hair when they were both feuding with each other, and Terry refused to do it. And well, this is when Hayes had a ponytail and it was draped over the back of the seat, and
He just cut it off.
yeah. But Sean Waldman, to this day, claims it wasn't him. But
Wasn't me. I didn't do it.
yeah, it was Owen. Wasn't me.
Wasn't
It was
Owen. It wasn't me. It was Owen. I didn't do I'm high. I can't move.
Yeah. So on this date, very significant date today in wrestling history, the flight, but in 1984, man, Texas, Atlanta, Green Bay, Savannah, Ashley, North Carolina, Charlotte, Coliseum, sold out everywhere. Professional wrestling at its apex zenith. This is all without Hulk Hogan. Didn't mention Hulk Hogan at all. This is all NWA and AWA cards selling out arenas because of how popular professional wrestling was in my favorite year, 1984. And that was my favorite segment because that is a wrestling historian.
Craig, where can people follow you, sir?
If they want to follow me, they can get on one of those computers that I hear so many people talking about and go to that social media thing and go to Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter and follow me at Craig Ligons, CraigLiGgeons.
My hand disappeared. Oh, no, there it is. Follow me on Twitter at DanLaw83. Well, all social media platforms, DanLaw83. To listen to the audio version of the podcast or to subscribe, please, on your Apple or Android phone, type into your podcast, network thingy, VOC Nation Radio Network, or go to thebradyhicks.com. Or we'll be live every Wednesday on Facebook, Twitch, and Twitter Live or Periscope. Type in DanLaw83. For Craig Ligons, yes. For Craig Ligons, I'm the above average comedian Dan Calachico. We made it through another week. See you next week. Have a good one, everybody.